Hi everyone, my name is Cameron Maynard, and this is my Week 5 video journal. This week, I will be talking about Part 4, Chapter 16 of the Emotions in the Digital World textbook, which is called Online Emotional Support and Coping with Stress and Crises. We've all had to deal with stressful events, right? Well, I have too, and this chapter resonated with me in that regard, and I related to it well. The chapter discusses things like stress, coping, and social support before going on to talk about things like online and offline social support, individual motivations and demographic considerations, and mediated relationships before even delving into the COVID-19 pandemic, which I experienced and lived through, and it was not fun. Um, the first thing that stood out to me in this chapter was early in the chapter when coping was discussed. Let me tell you, I'm someone who has had to learn to cope, and I'm still learning how to do it effectively. Whether I've had relationships with friends and women that have deteriorated in the past, whether I've had arguments with family, whether I've had to watch my favorite sports teams lose a game, whether or not I've experienced stress in my career as a journalist. There are plenty of moments where I've had to learn to cope and let it roll off of me like water off a duck's back, as they say. It's not always easy, but I try to do it. That section of the chapter resonated with me so much because I could go on all day about coping and stuff like that and having to deal with stressful events. For example, last year, I thought I was a lock to win an award from the West Virginia Press Association for a story I wrote or a photo I took at an event. But I didn't win one, and almost all my colleagues around me won an award. While I was certainly happy for them, it still hurt that I couldn't win one, and I had to just cope with it and move on, and that's ultimately what I did. And as my career goes on, I can learn to always strive to do my job to the best of my ability and know that my worth as a journalist isn't determined by things like contests. I can just make my best effort to cope if situations like that were to arise, and it would behoove me to, keep that knowledge with me in the future. I was also in the journalism business when the COVID 19 pandemic hit. When it did, the variety of sporting events I normally covered stopped happening, and then I had to come up with different ideas for stories, such as feature stories and things of that nature. Reading about COVID 19 in this chapter made me think about that time in my life, and it makes me cognizant of the fact that as my career rolls on, I always need to be thinking outside the box and doing my best to come up with story ideas, even when it may seem like there's not a lot going on in the area. It was a very good and thought provoking chapter to read, and I'm glad that I armed myself with more knowledge as a journalist by reading it.